Sacred Heart Hospital in Raleigh smells like antiseptic and fear. Elena Martinez moves through the corridors at 5:48 a.m., 20 minutes before day shift arrives, when the hallways belong to no one and everyone forgets to look. Navy scrubs. Name badge clipped to her collar. Sneakers with rubber soles worn thin from 3 years of invisible walking through these halls. She pushes a medication cart past the nurse's station where the overnight skeleton crew doesn't glance up. They never do. The fluorescent lights hum overhead, that constant 60-cycle drone that becomes invisible after the first week. She's been here 156 weeks. The hum is like the sound of her own heartbeat now, steady and automatic. Her hands are steady. Her eyes stay down. This is the uniform of invisibility, competence without opinion, presence without personality. Just a nurse. That's what they see. Room 307 is at the end of the East Corridor, past the recovery wing where post-operative patients drift in and out of pharmaceutical sleep. The door stands half open. Machines tick and beep, the cardiac monitor running a steady 68 beats per minute, the blood pressure cuff hissing its periodic inflation and release. She pushes the medication cart through the threshold without knocking. Routine. She's done this 43 times in the past 6 weeks. The man in the bed doesn't stir. Early morning sedation still working, keeping him under the surface where pain can't reach. She's read his chart twice a day since admission. Navy SEAL, retired, 19 months post-injury. Bilateral femoral reconstruction. Tibial reinforcement with cadaver bone graft. The surgical notes are clinical and thorough, but something about the injury pattern has been nagging at her since intake. Shrapnel wounds don't typically cluster in that specific distribution unless the blast came from below. Unless someone was already kneeling. Elena sets the medication cart aside with practiced silence. The wheels don't squeak. She's learned every inch of Sacred Heart's layout, where the tile is worn smooth, where the old linoleum catches, how to move without making a sound. Muscle memory from a different life, a different uniform. She pulls the chart from the foot rail and opens it. The pages are exact and ordered, pre-op labs, imaging reports, surgical summary from Dr. Ashford dated 6 weeks ago. She lingers on the surgical notes. 3 pages of dense medical documentation. The blade approach was anterior lateral, the sutures are listed as interrupted silk, the blood loss recorded as 847 milliliters. All standard. But the injury pattern underneath, she traces it with her eyes, not her finger. Old habits. Never touch without cause. Never leave fingerprints on other people's secrets. The blast came from below. Her gut tells her this. 20 years of field medicine, of holding dying men while their blood soaked into desert sand, makes her read wounds like other people read faces. The man's chest rises and falls in the rhythm of post-surgical sedation. She should leave. She knows this. She knows the danger of looking too closely at things that don't concern her. But something about the surgical timeline doesn't match the injury severity, and the reconstruction choices are more expensive than standard protocol would dictate. Why fuse the tibia when a surgical repair would cost $18,000 less? Why use the anterolateral approach when medial is standard for this type of fracture? She hears the footsteps before she sees him. Expensive shoes on linoleum. The click-click rhythm of someone who walks like they own the floor. Dr. Ashford. She knows his schedule. Rounds begin at 5:52 a.m., always on time, always preceded by the sound of Italian leather on tile. She has 19 seconds to close the chart and move. She moves. Elena replaces the chart in the foot rail with the same fluid grace she uses to position patients. The motion takes 3 seconds. She's already turning toward the door when his voice cuts through the hum of machines. Nurse. The word is deliberate. Not Nurse Martinez. Not a greeting. Just the title, the way someone addresses an object. Elena stops. She doesn't turn around yet. This is the moment where she decides whether to engage or disengage. The patch inside her jacket, the one sewn carefully against her heart with thread that matches no hospital standard, pulses with the weight of 20 years of silence. She turns. Slowly. Eyes down. Hands at her sides. The posture of deference. Dr. Ashford stands in the doorway, tablet in one hand, the other reaching up to adjust his stethoscope. He's 48 years old, according to the hospital directory. Princeton education, surgical fellowship at Johns Hopkins, private practice before joining Sacred Heart 5 years ago. His presence makes the air pressure change. Not because he's particularly tall, he's 5'10", but because he moves through space like he believes it belongs to him exclusively. His eyes are the color of a shark's belly, pale and cold and incapable of reflecting light back. That patient's chart is restricted to attending physicians. It's not a question. Elena's eyes remain on his sternum, on the monogrammed initials of his shirt. J.P.A. James Pierce Ashford. The kind of name that comes with trust funds and country club memberships. I was reviewing post-operative orders, Dr. Ashford. The medication dosing for this morning's. The chart is restricted. 3 words. 3 full stops. Like periods at the end of sentences that have more to say but aren't allowed to say it. Elena nods once. A micro-movement. Submissive. Forgettable. She steps toward the door, and he doesn't move. She has to pass close enough to smell his cologne, something expensive that costs more than she makes in a week. He keeps the tablet angled against his chest, but not before she sees the screen. Just for a fraction of a second. Just long enough to register. Bank transfers. Routing numbers. Offshore account codes with Swiss numerals. A column of deposits that begins at $15,000 and escalates through amounts that have too many zeros. The cursor hovers over a file named farmer_trial_confidential.pdf. He turns the tablet away before she can read the dollar figure at the bottom. His jaw is tight. His knuckles have gone white around the plastic edges. Elena steps past him and out into the hallway. She doesn't look back. She knows what she saw. She's trained to see things in the periphery that others miss, angles, reactions, the way a person's body language changes when they've been caught at something they shouldn't be doing. The Sangin Valley taught her to read intent in the space between heartbeats. 20 years ago, when she pulled an 8-year-old boy named David from the rubble of a collapsed school, she'd learned to trust the instinct that separates those who survive from those who become statistics. She pushes the medication cart toward the next patient room. Her hands are steady. Her breathing is controlled. This is the uniform she wears now, invisibility. Competence without questions. The kind of nurse that people don't think twice about, that they forget is in the room, that they assume knows nothing beyond the protocols in the employee handbook. But that wasn't the whole truth of what she'd seen in the chart. The surgical notes didn't match the injury pattern because the injury wasn't really a combat wound. It was something else. Something deliberate. Something someone had paid Dr. Ashford $60,000, she'd seen that number before he turned the tablet away, to classify differently in the medical record. The offshore account. The trial designation. The classified markings on the file he'd tried to hide. She'd seen a man try to bury something. And she'd recognized the pattern of erasure because she understood it from the inside. She'd lived it for 20 years. Elena moves past room 308, past room 309. The medication cart wheels squeak once, and she adjusts her stride to prevent it again. The man in bed 307 doesn't know she was just standing over his chart, reading the lies in his surgical record. The boy she pulled from the rubble in 2004 wouldn't recognize the woman she's become, the one who disappears so completely that people look through her like she's made of glass. But she remembers him. Every single detail. The way his small hand had gripped her jacket collar while she carried him through the dust. The weight of him. The sound of his breathing. The way she'd sung to him in Pashto, a lullaby her field team had taught her, while waiting for the medevac helicopter. She'd saved his life once, 20 years ago in a place that no longer appears on her service record. And now, standing in Sacred Heart Hospital at 5:51 a.m., pulling a medication cart through corridors that smell like antiseptic and fear, she had to decide what to do about the fact that someone was trying to erase his existence all over again. The fluorescent lights hum their constant tone. Elena adjusts the 4-drip in room 309 with hands that have held lives together in conditions that would break most people. She doesn't flinch. She doesn't hesitate. She moves like someone who has already survived the worst, and whatever comes next is just information. The next words out of Dr. Ashford's mouth would change everything. The overhead page crackled at 2:04 p.m., and every head on the surgical floor turned at once. Nurse Nightingale to the administrator's office. Nurse Nightingale. The nickname, mocking, designed to diminish, echoed through 3 floors of Sacred Heart like a public flogging. Elena kept her hands moving, finishing the 4 flush on room 312, her jaw tight but her face blank. She'd been caught. Dr. Ashford had seen her lingering too long over the SEAL's surgical chart, saw her hands pause on the suture notes that didn't match the injury pattern she remembered from 20 years ago in Sangin, when she was someone else entirely and had pulled an 8-year-old boy from rubble with shrapnel buried in his legs. The walk to the administrator's office took 4 minutes. Elena counted them. The corridor felt narrower, the fluorescent lights overhead humming like they were closing in. Nurses she'd worked with for 3 years suddenly found reasons to look at their phones. An orderly pulled his eyes away as she passed. The badge clipped to her scrubs felt heavier than it should. She wore the badge proudly enough, but nobody knew what it actually meant, the faded unit patch sewn carefully inside her jacket lining, hidden where no one would ever see it. That patch had been stitched by her hands the night her husband died, the only person on earth who'd ever known what she really was. Now he was gone. Now she was just a floor nurse in Raleigh, invisible in her scrubs, known to no one except a man who'd been 8 years old when she saved his life. The administrator's office was empty when she arrived. Dr. Ashford made her wait 8 minutes in the hallway. Then the supply closet door opened, and he pulled her inside without a word. The shelving pressed close on both sides, sterile gauze, saline bags, rolls of tape stacked shoulder high. There was nowhere to move. Ashford's face was inches from hers, and she could smell the coffee on his breath, the expensive cologne he wore like armor. His voice was quiet, which made it worse. Quiet voices carried more weight in spaces this small. "You're a floor nurse," he said. "You read orders. You follow protocols. You don't question surgical decisions made by people with actual medical degrees. Do you understand me, or do I need to use smaller words?" His jaw was clenched. His eyes had the look of a man who wasn't used to being challenged, who'd spent his entire career surrounded by people too afraid to push back. She could see the calculation in his expression. He was trying to decide how scared she should be. How broken. Elena took one measured breath. Just one. The kind of breath she'd learned to take in a combat hospital 20 years ago, when the world was falling apart and panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. She let a single tear escape down her left cheek, not from fear, not from the weight of his proximity or his threats, but from something else entirely. From the weight of knowing who she really was and having to stand here, small and quiet, while a man like this tried to erase her. She wiped the tear without breaking eye contact. When she spoke, her voice was steady, pitched low enough that only he could hear it. "I wonder what you're more afraid of," she said. "What I saw, or what I'll do about it." His face went white. Not red. Not angry. White. The kind of white that comes when someone realizes they've made a catastrophic miscalculation. She'd seen him at his laptop that afternoon. She wasn't supposed to be in his office, but she'd been looking for a missing patient file and found his door cracked open. The laptop screen had shown financial transfers, neat rows of them, going to an offshore account labeled with a single phrase, "Clinical Trial Compensation, Unapproved Protocol." The amounts were significant. Hundreds of thousands. The numbers told a story he didn't want told. His breathing changed. Shallower. Faster. For a moment, Elena thought he might actually touch her, might move toward aggression, but instead he stepped back. The shelving rattled behind him. When he spoke again, his voice had lost all pretense of professional courtesy. It was just anger now, naked and desperate. "You have no idea what you're involved in," he said. "You think you can read one file and suddenly you understand medicine? You think you can threaten me? I've ended careers for less. I'll end yours before lunch tomorrow." Elena said nothing. She'd learned, over 3 years of working under his authority, that silence was a weapon he couldn't counter. Every time he spoke, he revealed more. Every time she stayed quiet, she took more power. She turned and walked out of the supply closet without another word, and she could feel his presence behind her in the doorway, feel the weight of his panic like a physical thing. By 4:38 p.m. that same day, her electronic access had been restricted to basic charting only. The hospital's system locked her out of anything beyond vital signs and medication records. By 5:15 p.m., she'd been reassigned to graveyard shift, night shift, 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., on the isolated surgical recovery wing. The charge nurse who'd actually respected her work had been reassigned to the main campus across town. The staffing algorithm had been adjusted, she discovered later, so that she would work alone on the night wing when the SEAL was her only complex post-operative patient. The real humiliation came 5 days later. Morning shift change, 6:16 a.m., the parking lot of Sacred Heart Hospital packed with arriving day shift staff. 70 people. Elena was unlocking her car when Dr. Ashford appeared with the director of nursing at his side, his voice pitched to carry, clinical and loud. "Effective immediately," he said, "Elena Martinez is being transferred to night shift permanently with restricted electronic access pending review of her competency standards. She'll be moved to county clinic within 30 days due to repeated boundary violations and inability to function within her scope of practice." He said it like he was reading a medical chart aloud. Like she wasn't standing right there. Like she was already gone. The parking lot went quiet. Nurses froze mid-step. An orderly reached for his phone. Elena felt every eye land on her like a physical weight, but she simply took one measured breath, unlocked her car door, and drove away without looking back. She didn't flinch. Didn't stumble. Didn't let her hand shake on the steering wheel until she was 3 miles from Sacred Heart and sitting alone in her car in an empty parking lot. Then she let them shake. For exactly 2 minutes, she let herself feel the weight of what he'd done. Then she drove home and prepared for her first graveyard shift that evening. The night wing of Sacred Heart was designed for recovery patients who'd had successful surgeries, low acuity cases requiring routine monitoring. Elena had worked day shifts for 3 years on this floor and knew every monitor, every alarm, every protocol. But at night, with skeleton crew staffing, it felt like a different hospital entirely. The hallways were dimmer. The monitors beeped at different intervals. The silence was deeper, the kind of silence that comes when most of the world is sleeping and the people still awake are the ones holding broken things together. Room 307 was at the far end of the wing, past 6 other patient rooms that tonight were empty. Just Elena and the SEAL. Just the two of them in the darkness, separated by 20 years and an entire universe of classified secrets. On her 4th night shift, at 3:17 a.m., she heard the alarm. The monitor in room 307 screened its warning, and Elena's body moved before her mind caught up. Heart rate dropping, 142, 118, 95, blood pressure collapsing like a building in free fall, and his lips turning that particular shade of blue that meant his oxygen saturation was gone. She moved through the doorway at a run, but she already knew the code team was 6 minutes away from the main campus. Maybe more if they were already committed to another emergency. She had maybe 90 seconds before irreversible damage set in. Before the SEAL's heart stopped beating entirely. The monitor flatlined. The sound was like a period at the end of a sentence. Final. Complete. Elena hit the code button anyway, more to alert anyone else in the building than from any real hope, then turned to the crash cart. Her fingers found the scalpel without hesitation. 14-gauge needle would be too slow, too uncertain. She needed access to his heart now. The left anterolateral thoracotomy. The same procedure she'd performed once before, in a collapsed schoolhouse in Sangin with mortar fire overhead and an 8-year-old boy bleeding out in her lap while she was still captain, still had a name and a rank and a unit and a future she wasn't allowed to keep. The knife entered between his ribs. Her hands moved like they were operating on pure muscle memory, the kind of memory that exists deeper than thought. Sterile field be damned. Protocol be damned. She cracked his chest with the efficiency of someone who'd done this before, who understood that pain was data and data was survival. His heart was visible now. Stopped. Pale. Surrounded by blood that shouldn't have been there. Ashford had done something to him. Something in the surgical repair, something in the post-operative protocol. She could see it now, the inflammation, the hemorrhage that didn't match the original surgical notes, the signs of a drug reaction that matched a compound she'd heard whispers about in his research but never a name. Elena's fingers found the heart. She began to massage it, gentle but firm, the way you'd massage something precious that had stopped working. Sinus rhythm. Come back. Her hands moved with the terrifying precision of someone who'd performed this exact motion before, had felt a child's heart restart under her palms in a place where the rules of peace didn't apply. The monitor beeped. Once. Twice. The rhythm came back, fragile, uncertain, but present. The SEAL's eyes flickered open, and for just a moment, his pupils fixed on her face, and something passed between them, recognition, maybe, or memory, or the understanding that the same person who'd saved him once had just saved him again. The graveyard shift started at 11 p.m., and Elena had already walked the surgical recovery wing twice before the night settled into that particular silence that hospitals cultivate after dark, the kind of quiet where you could hear the ventilators breathing in rhythm, where every monitor beep sounded like it was announcing something final. The isolated north wing housed 8 beds. Tonight, only 3 were occupied. Dr. Ashford had made sure of that, pulling patients and consolidating the census with the precision of someone dismantling a house one nail at a time. The respiratory therapist who should have been her backup was already gone, reassigned to the day shift at Mercy General across town on what the schedule called urgent staffing needs, a lie everyone understood. Elena was alone. That was the point. She checked room 307 at 11:51 p.m. The SEAL lay on his back, his left leg ending just below the knee, the prosthetic propped against the bedside table like a weapon he'd temporarily disarmed. The surgical site was clean, the dressing pristine, vital stable on the monitor, blood pressure 118/76, oxygen saturation 98%, heart rate 62, the rhythm of a man sleeping after surviving. His eyes were closed, but she saw the tension in his jaw, the micro movements of someone not quite at peace. She'd pulled him from concrete rubble 20 years ago when she was someone else entirely, someone who knew how to find people in the dark and bring them back. He'd been 8 years old then, terrified, covered in dust that turned to mud when he cried. Now he was a man whose body had been remade by war and whose presence in this hospital had somehow called her old self back from the dead. Pain level? Elena asked softly. His eyes opened. Focused. Sharp. Manageable. She nodded, checked the 4-line running clear fluids, verified the pump settings on the epidural. Everything textbook perfect. Everything exactly as it should be at midnight on a routine post-operative night. She pressed her fingertips against the pulse point on his wrist, strong, steady, the rhythm of a warrior's heart. I'll be right outside. I know you will, he said, and something in those 5 words made her understand that he remembered, that maybe some part of him had always known. The night moved in hours that felt like minutes. Elena sat at the nurse's station, a metal desk facing a wall of monitors, each screen showing the sine waves and numbers of 3 sleeping patients. The fluorescent lights hummed their endless mechanical prayer. Rain started around 2 a.m., hammering the windows like something trying to break through, and she found herself staring at the water streaming down the glass, thinking about how water always found its way through, no matter how sealed you tried to make things. Pain was information. Ashford had taught her that, in his own way, the pain of dismantling, the information of strategy, the understanding that a man like him didn't just attack, he isolated. He weakened the infrastructure first. At 3:17 a.m., the monitor in room 307 accelerated. The heart rate jumped from 62 to 94 to 118, a steady climb like an elevator with no button to stop it. Elena was moving before her conscious mind caught up, her legs already carrying her down the corridor that suddenly felt too long, the fluorescent light stretching into something nightmare-like. She pushed through the door. The seal's face was grey. Not pale, grey, the color of blood being pulled away from the surface, the body's emergency signal that something fundamental was failing. His eyes were open, unfocused, searching. "Stay with me," Elena said, and her voice sounded different in the dark room, lower, clearer, stripped of the careful deference she'd worn like a uniform these past 3 years. She ran her fingers across his chest, feeling for the warmth of blood, finding it where it shouldn't be, a slow seep through the surgical dressing, not dramatic, just persistent, just enough. A bleeder they'd missed. A small artery deciding to open in the middle of the night when backup was a phone call away and the only person in the building who could help was the nurse they'd already destroyed. She checked the monitor. Blood pressure 102/58 and dropping. Oxygen sat 91. The numbers were telling a story she'd heard before, in a field hospital in Sangin, with the sound of small arms fire somewhere in the distance and a child on the table whose name she couldn't say because secrecy mattered more than truth. She didn't reach for the phone. She didn't call the code. She did what her hands knew how to do. The crash cart was 30 feet away. Elena moved like water finding the ocean, smooth and inevitable. The crash cart. The equipment. The 15-blade scalpel already sterile in its packaging. She tore it open with her teeth while her other hand was already prepping the surgical site, alcohol swab in aggressive circles, and there was no hesitation, no moment where she asked permission from the person she was supposed to be. That person dissolved. What remained was older, harder, and absolutely certain. "What are you?" the SEAL started, but his voice was already shallow, the oxygen deprivation stealing his words. The scalpel went in along the 5th intercostal space, mid-axillary line, a cut that was muscle memory given form. The skin opened like a door. The intercostal muscles parted beneath her second cut. The pleura came next, and then there was blood, real blood, arterial blood, the warm copper smell of it filling the small space around them. She needed light. The bedside lamp wasn't enough. Her phone flashlight was in her pocket. She held it in her teeth, angle awkward, but it was light, and light was enough. The thoracotomy spreader should have been in the cart. It wasn't. Ashford's sabotage was thorough, systematic, perfectly calibrated. She used her fingers instead, spreading the ribs apart with the kind of force that should have broken them, but the body is more resilient than people think, the chest cavity opening like she was peeling back a secret. Her left hand went in. The ribs spreading wider. Blood everywhere, warm and slick and real. The lungs came first, pink tissue, deflated, pushed aside. She was looking for the heart. She always found it. There. Pale, barely contracting, the rhythm breaking down into something that wasn't quite fibrillation but was heading there, the slow shutdown of a muscle that had kept him alive through 20 years of wanting to die. She positioned her fingers. 2 fingers. Pressure point. The hand that had held her late husband's face as he died, the hand that had signed away her own name, the hand that had carried secrets long enough to transform into a weapon, that hand now massaged his heart back to consciousness with the rhythm of a man who knew how to steal life from death. Compress. Release. Compress. Release. Each movement precise as a prayer. The heart stuttered. Caught. Took a breath that belonged to her, stolen through her own commitment to pressure and release and the absolute refusal to let him die on a night when she'd already lost everything else. The monitor behind her began to beep with something almost normal. Almost. "Come on," she whispered, and it wasn't a prayer because she'd given up praying years ago. It was a command, the kind of command that came from the place inside her that had never stopped being major, had never stopped knowing how to order a heart to beat. Not today. The SEAL's chest rose. The ribs expanded under her hands. She felt it before the monitor told her, the return of pressure, the reclamation of rhythm, the heart remembering that it was supposed to keep him alive. Sinus rhythm. Irregular at first, then settling into something almost normal. Oxygen sat 89 climbing to 91. The body remembering how to live. But that wasn't the worst part. What happened next changed everything. Dr. Ashford stood in the doorway. He'd been in the building. She'd later learn he often stayed nights, monitoring his investments, his fraudulent trials, the machinery of his corruption. His face went white first, understanding what he was seeing, and then red, the kind of red that comes from rage and fear combined, the red of a man watching his carefully constructed narrative collapse into something inconvenient and true. "What the hell have you done?" His voice was a scream that sounded like it was coming from somewhere buried. "You're a nurse. This is unauthorized. This is criminal. This is..." Elena didn't look at him. Her hands were still moving, still working, still keeping the seal's heart rhythmic with pressure and precision. She didn't have time for Ashford. She didn't have time for anything except the next compression, the next release, the continuation of something that refused to end because she wouldn't let it. "Call the code team," she said quietly. Her voice the way it sounded in another lifetime, before names changed and identities dissolved. "And Ashford? Get out of my operating room." It wasn't a request. It was a command. The seal's eyes opened slightly, and something in them shifted, recognition, maybe, or the understanding that the person who'd saved him in Sangin had just saved him again, and that some debts transcend time and identity and all the careful rules that keep broken people broken. Dr. Ashford arrived as Elena's hands were closing, the last suture pulling the seal's chest wall together, knitting skin back into the landscape of a life that had almost ended on her table. His face appeared in the doorway white as bone, his jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscle working beneath his skin. For 3 seconds he didn't speak. He just stood there, taking in the sight of her in full surgical precision, hands steady as surgical lasers, moving with the kind of competence that couldn't be faked or hidden behind a nurse's title. "What did you do?" His voice came out thin, almost strangled. Elena didn't look up from her work. "The last knot. The final tie. My job. You performed an invasive surgical procedure. You opened his chest. Ashford stepped into the room, his hands clenching and unclenching. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Do you comprehend the liability, the protocol violations, He stopped. His eyes narrowed. He was looking at her hands. At the way she moved. At the muscle memory made visible in every precise gesture. Recognition flickered across his face like lightning, and with it came something worse than anger. Fear. Elena tied off the final suture. She didn't turn around. His sinus rhythm is stable. O2 sat 94. Blood pressure climbing. He's going to live. Because of what you did, or in spite of it. But even as Ashford spoke, she heard the uncertainty in his voice. He'd seen her save the seal. He'd watched her pull a human heart back from the edge of nothing. And he understood, in that moment, that whatever story he told about her now would have to contend with the fact that she'd been right. That she'd known this patient's anatomy. That she'd moved with the confidence of someone who'd done exactly this before. "Nurse," Ashford said, his voice dropping lower, more dangerous. "You will not speak to anyone about what happened here. You will not document this. You will not." "I'm going to scrub out," Elena said quietly. "I'm going to fill out an incident report. And then I'm going to go home." He moved faster than she expected, blocking her path to the door. His face had shifted, the anger was still there, but beneath it now was calculation. A man recalibrating. "If you do that, I will ensure you never work in a hospital again. Not in Raleigh. Not in North Carolina. Not anywhere that counts." Elena looked at him. Just looked. The composure of someone who'd been threatened by people with actual guns. The calm of someone who'd stared down Taliban commanders across barren mountains. "I understand what you're saying, Doctor." "Good." He stepped aside slightly. Then we have an understanding. Within the hour, Ashford made 4 phone calls. Elena, sitting in the break room trying to keep her hands from shaking, heard his voice echoing from the administrative wing, clipped, commanding, the tone of a man calling in markers. She couldn't hear the words, but she could hear the rhythm of power being deployed like artillery. The first call was to the hospital board chairman. The second to the credentialing committee. The third to someone at the state medical board. The fourth to a colleague 3 buildings over at Duke University Medical Center. Each call lasted exactly 4 minutes. Each ended with what sounded like agreement. By 2 a.m., the decision had been made. Elena found the email in her personal account at 2:53 a.m., the official timestamp showing when HR had sent it, giving it the appearance of bureaucratic inevitability rather than retaliation. Incident report classification, seal patient, room 307, 11:33 p.m., unauthorized invasive procedure. The witness who'd been in the trauma bay, young resident named Chen, the only person besides Ashford who'd seen Elena crack that patient's chest and save his life, had been reassigned effective immediately to the pediatric ward at County General, effective transfer tomorrow at 6 a.m. The incident report had been altered to read that Elena had attempted emergency thoracotomy without authorization, without proper training, without supervision, in direct violation of hospital protocol. It made no mention of the SEAL's survival. It made no mention that the only reason he'd been salvageable at all was because she'd understood his anatomy the way surgeons understand it, with the kind of precision that comes from having performed the procedure before. At 6:14 a.m., 2 security guards arrived at her locker in the basement break room. They didn't look her in the eye. One held a plastic bag. The other held a form on a clipboard. "Badge deactivation," he said quietly. "Effective immediately. You're to surrender your hospital access card and exit the premises within 5 minutes." "Am I being escorted out?" Elena's voice was steady. "Professional." "Dr. Ashford's orders," the guard said. He actually winced when he said it. "I'm sorry. We're just following." "It's fine," Elena said. She pulled her badge from her lanyard and set it in the bag. The weight of the plastic shifted. Something as simple as a magnetic stripe could contain your entire identity, your entire worth, your entire life compressed into the access a piece of plastic granted you. She'd worn this badge for 3 years. 3 years of being invisible, being just a nurse, being exactly the kind of person that hospitals built their systems to control. And now it was being revoked because she'd saved a life. The security guard held the exit door open. It was 6:19 a.m. The parking lot was still dark, the kind of darkness that comes just before dawn, when the world hasn't quite decided if it's going to be day or stay night. Elena walked to her car. She didn't look back. She didn't cry. Not yet. That night, at 11:36 p.m., Elena stood in the rain at Cedar Grove Cemetery, soaked through, her clothes clinging like wet rope, staring at the headstone that read, "Captain Michael Martinez, beloved husband and father." She'd been standing here for 40 minutes. The rain fell straight down, not at an angle, which meant the wind had died and the storm was settling in for the long haul. Thunder rolled across Raleigh like distant artillery. "I saved that boy twice," she whispered. Her voice cracked on the second word, and she let it crack. There was no one here to see. There was no protocol, no composure necessary. Just Elena and the rain and the name of a man who'd loved her despite knowing exactly what she was. Once when he was 8 and bleeding out in a building that was falling apart, and last night when his heart stopped and I brought it back. She knelt in the mud beside the grave. And I still couldn't save myself. I couldn't save us. I failed you, Michael. I promised I'd keep our family safe. I promised I'd keep this life you built for us protected, and I failed. The rain didn't answer. The lightning didn't respond. The cemetery stayed silent except for the sound of water drumming on headstones, on grass, on the shoulders of a woman kneeling in the dark. Pain is data, she'd always told herself. Pain is information. But this pain was just pain. This was what happened when you tried to exist in two worlds at once, as both the invisible nurse and the warrior you'd been before the army had erased your identity and the Pentagon had buried your service record so deep that you couldn't even access it yourself. She stayed there until her bones went numb. Until the rain soaked so far into her skin that she wasn't sure where the water ended and her body began. Until dawn broke grey and tentative over Raleigh, and a 16-year-old boy found his mother kneeling beside his father's grave, and without speaking, without asking questions, helped her stand and walked her back to the car, his arm around her shoulders the way she'd taught him to support wounded soldiers, firm but not desperate, present but not pitying. 3 days later, the hospital board would convene in their executive conference room, 847 square feet of mahogany and leather, to finalize her termination. Dr. Ashford would present his case with the precision of a surgeon making an incision, every altered document perfectly placed, every fabricated witness statement carefully attributed, every piece of evidence designed to make Elena Martinez look like a danger to herself and others. The vote would be scheduled for 10 a.m. But what happened at 9:16 a.m. would rewrite everything Ashford had built in those 72 hours of frantic phone calls and paperwork and desperate positioning. But that wasn't the worst part for him. The worst part was what he still didn't understand. 3 days passed like a held breath. The hospital board sat in their leather chairs in the executive conference room on the 34th floor, papers arranged in neat stacks, the machinery of institutional power grinding toward one final verdict. Elena Martinez would be terminated for cause, her nursing license under review, her career buried under the clinical designation unauthorized invasive procedure. They'd already written the press release. They'd already notified the state board. They'd already begun the process of erasing her from the building's record entirely. Dr. Ashford sat at the head of the table, his expensive suit pressed to perfection, his jawline tight with the satisfaction of a man who'd orchestrated every move like a chess master watching his opponent's king fall. But that wasn't the worst part for him. The worst part was what he still didn't understand. The conference room door opened. Nobody expected it to open. Elena's teenage son walked through that door carrying a shadow box. Mahogany frame, black velvet backing, glass front catching the fluorescent lights. His hands trembled slightly as he set it on the conference table, the kind of trembling that comes from holding something heavier than weight, holding truth. The board members leaned forward. Dr. Ashford's face went pale. The shadow box was open. Inside, arranged in order from left to right, were 5 medals on ribbons, each one catching the light like it had been waiting for this exact moment. Elena's son pulled a piece of paper from his jacket pocket. His voice was steady, but everyone in the room could hear the cost of that steadiness. "My mother asked me to read this to you." He unfolded the paper, took a breath that filled the entire room, and began, Major Elena Martinez. United States Navy. 23 years of service. Pentagon Classified Extraction Team. 2 documented combat tours in. The first nurse in the room gasped, a sound like all the air leaving her body at once. Her tablet was in her lap. She pulled it up with shaking fingers, hands moving on muscle memory toward the Pentagon Personnel Database, a classified system that required 3 separate security clearances to access. The screen had been blank seconds ago, completely blank, showing error messages and access denied warnings. Now it blazed with information. Citations. Commendations. A complete service record that had been erased from every public database, every civilian record, every hospital file. Major Elena Martinez, JSOC Task Force 21, Sangin Valley Extraction, 21 lives recovered, 2 officers recovered, 1 senator's son recovered but deceased. The data flooded the screen like it had been waiting behind a door, locked, and someone had finally thrown it open. The disabled Navy SEAL in room 307 stood from his wheelchair. Not slowly. Not with struggle. He rose using his arms with the kind of controlled power that came from a body trained for combat operations, his unit commander standing beside him, a man whose uniform bore insignia that most of the board members didn't recognize, which meant it was the kind of authority that didn't need recognition. The commander's face was carved from granite. His eyes were the color of a North Atlantic winter. The SEAL spoke the first medal aloud, Bronze Star for Valor. His voice was steady as a laser. The board members stared. The commander nodded once, confirming. Silver star. The SEAL's hand moved to the second ribbon. Silver star again. His hand moved to the third. The room had gone so quiet you could hear the rain beginning to fall outside the windows, hammering the glass like applause that wouldn't stop. 2 purple hearts. The commander spoke this one, his voice like a tank idling in a garage. The board chair's face had gone the color of old bone. The SEAL reached the final medal. The last one. The one that sat center right in the shadow box like a heart in a chest. His fingers didn't shake. His voice didn't waver. Navy Cross. Sangin Valley, 2004. For extraordinary heroism under fire during a non-combatant extraction. All 28 civilians recovered. 0 fatalities under her command. Dr. Ashford opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He tried again. The words crumbled before they could form. His face had drained of every molecule of blood. His hands gripped the table edge so hard his knuckles turned white, and for the first time, the board members saw something they'd never seen before. They saw fear. Not anger. Not indignation. Fear. The door opened again. 2 FBI agents walked in carrying briefcases, their jackets bearing the unmistakable weight of federal authority. One of them was a woman with eyes that had interrogated people in 17 countries. The other was a man who moved like he'd spent 30 years breaking the truth out of liars. They set a laptop on the conference table, opened it, and turned the screen toward Dr. Ashford. The female agent spoke, Dr. Richard Ashford. We've been investigating pharmaceutical fraud at this facility for 6 weeks based on an anonymous tip regarding falsified drug trial data and unauthorized use of experimental compounds on post-operative patients. Her voice was the kind that didn't rise, didn't need to. When you attempted to alter Major Elena Martinez's personnel records yesterday to justify her termination, you triggered a federal database alarm. Her file is flagged at the highest classification level due to her Pentagon service record. That brought us her complete military history and gave us legal cause to execute search warrants on your office, your residence, your computers, and your financial records. The male agent gestured to the laptop screen. Bank transfers glowed in the dark. $847,000 moving through offshore pharmaceutical accounts in the Cayman Islands. Clinical trial data showing experimental compounds administered to patients without informed consent. Email chains with a pharmaceutical company paying per patient enrolled, not per cure, not per successful outcome, but per body put in a hospital bed and given an untested drug. You were running unapproved drug trials on vulnerable patients, the female agent continued. You were being paid approximately $8,000 per enrollment. You falsified their consent forms. You altered post-operative outcome reports to hide adverse reactions. And when Major Martinez began examining charts too closely, when she noticed surgical complications that matched known side effects of your experimental compounds, you destroyed her career to silence her. The hospital board chair's voice came out like ice. How many patients? 47 confirmed, the male agent said. 17 with severe complications. 3 with permanent disability. 2 with organ failure that required transplants we're still arranging. The company paid Dr. Ashford approximately $376,000 in total compensation. The SEAL commander stood. His presence made the air pressure change. Major Martinez was a decorated officer. She noticed irregularities in surgical outcomes. She did what any ethical person would do, she looked closer. And you decided that making money was worth her career. The reassigned charge nurse appeared on video call. Somehow, impossibly, they'd arranged it in advance. She testified with her voice steady that Dr. Ashford had threatened her employment if she didn't transfer out of the ICU, that he'd told her Elena was unstable, that she'd been terrified of losing her job. The words hung in the air like blood in water. The altered incident reports were displayed on the laptop screen alongside the backup server records. Side by side. The original thoracotomy report, written truthfully, showing Major Elena Martinez performing an emergency field thoracotomy with a 14-gauge needle and suture, saving the patient's life with a procedure that should have been impossible but wasn't, because she'd done it before, in Sangin, under fire. And then Dr. Ashford's version, where unauthorized invasive procedure replaced life-saving emergency surgery, where trained personnel somehow became unqualified staff member acting beyond scope of practice. The male agent reached into his briefcase. The sound of metal on metal. Handcuffs. Not the kind used in television shows. The kind used for federal prisoners. Dr. Richard Ashford, you're under arrest for wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, falsification of medical records, practicing medicine without proper authorization regarding experimental compounds, and obstruction of federal investigation. The female agent read him his rights as the handcuffs clicked onto his wrists, a sound like a period at the end of a sentence, like a door slamming shut, like the last note of a song nobody wanted to hear. The perp walk happened at 4:13 p.m. 73 staff members witnessed it. 51 of them recorded it on their phones. Dr. Ashford walked through the lobby of Sacred Heart Hospital, between two federal agents, his face turned downward, his expensive suit suddenly looking like a costume that someone else had chosen for him. He passed the nursing station where he'd mocked Elena, where he'd called her Nurse Nightingale like it was a joke written in acid. He passed the supply closet where he'd cornered her, his face inches from hers, threatening everything she held. He passed the parking lot where he'd publicly humiliated her in front of the arriving day shift, announcing her transfer like it was a victory. The rain had started falling harder. 6 months later, Elena Martinez walked through the main entrance of Sacred Heart Hospital wearing a white coat. The name embroidered above the pocket read Director of Trauma Services in lettering that caught the light. On her left sleeve, sewn proudly where everyone could see it, was the faded unit patch from Sangin, the emblem of JSOC Task Force 21, the one she'd kept hidden for 15 years, the one she'd sworn she'd never display again. Her son walked beside her, heading toward the pediatric wing where he now volunteered 3 days a week. The shadow box hung in a place of honor in the hospital's military service memorial on the 2nd floor, the 5 medals visible through the glass, each one a truth that couldn't be hidden anymore. The disabled SEAL worked in the PT department now, helping other wounded veterans navigate the impossible architecture of recovery. His wheelchair was a choice now, not a necessity. He walked with a cane most days, his body slowly remembering how to carry itself without the reminder of what he'd lost and what Major Martinez had saved. The board had issued formal apologies to Elena, to the reassigned charge nurse, to 3 other staff members Dr. Ashford had targeted over the years, to the 47 patients whose care had been compromised by fraud. 14 federal counts against Dr. Ashford. Trial date pending. Elena's footsteps echoed on the tile floor, rubber-soled shoes, the kind that don't announce themselves, the kind a warrior wears when moving through a space she owns. Her eyes forward. Her spine straight. In the lobby, at the night security desk, a man in an ill-fitting contractor uniform emptied a trash can. Dr. Richard Ashford. Awaiting trial. Assigned to night shift. Federal ankle monitor under his left pants leg, visible if anyone bothered to look. The contracting company had hired him because federal law required employers to consider formerly incarcerated persons, and technically he wasn't incarcerated yet, just awaiting trial, just one of the waiting. His medical license was suspended. His reputation was ash. His carefully constructed empire was reduced to minimum wage and surveillance. His eyes dropped to his shoes as Elena walked past. He didn't speak. He didn't look up. The moment lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then it was over. Elena didn't slow her pace. Didn't acknowledge him. Didn't give him the satisfaction of her attention. That was the most powerful thing she could do, treat him as invisible, the way he'd tried to treat her, and have it mean something completely different when she did it. It meant, you don't matter. You never mattered. I was never really fighting you. In the elevator, the SEAL joined her, leaning on his cane, his movements efficient and strong. He noticed the patch on her sleeve. The faded colors. The unit emblem. He smiled, a real smile, the kind that comes from understanding. You're not hiding anymore. Elena's hand touched the patch gently, fingers tracing the stitching. I hid for 15 years to protect my family. Turns out the best protection was the truth. They couldn't hurt us once we stopped pretending there was anything to hurt. That evening, she taught a trauma surgery course to residents in the same conference room where she'd been judged. 12 residents sat in the chairs, laptops open, eyes forward. Elena stood at the podium with the screen glowing behind her, showing an X-ray of a perfectly healed chest cavity, the SEAL's chest, healed clean, the thoracotomy scar invisible under the surface, proof of a life that should have ended but didn't. You'll face moments in your careers, Elena said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd given orders under fire, when doing the right thing costs you everything. When the powerful tell you to be silent. To stay small. To know your place. To understand that questioning them is career suicide. Her eyes moved across the room, touching each resident, binding them all in witness. I want to tell you what I learned. True class is what you do when the lights go out. When nobody's watching. When you could get away with the wrong choice and choose the right one anyway. She clicked off the projector. The lights came up. Outside the window, visible through the rain streaked glass, she could see the parking lot. A man in a contractor uniform pushed a trash cart through the downpour, his shoulders hunched, his face turned downward. His expensive car was gone, seized by federal authorities. His career was gone. His certainty was gone. Elena watched for exactly 2 seconds. Then she turned back to the residents, back to the work of teaching them what it meant to be a healer, what it meant to fight for people who couldn't fight for themselves, what it meant to carry a secret and then set it down. Any questions? She asked. And the room filled with hands. If you've made it this far, you know that the quiet ones, the ones in scrubs, the ones pushing mops, the ones working nights, might be carrying more weight than you can imagine. Subscribe to see more stories of hidden heroes. Like this video if it made you think about someone you misjudged. Comment below, have you ever been underestimated by someone who didn't know your real story?